So now let's talk about the two line. The two line is the archetype of the hermit. Also goes by the natural or the gifted or the mystic. So the two line is your unconscious self, meaning that it's something that's harder to see in yourself, but it can unconsciously run the show. So how many of you have ever felt like you can go through really intense periods of hermiting? And this can look, it can show up in a myriad of ways. It could feel really good of like, wow, I'm just hermiting right now and I'm really not available for anybody. You kind of dip off the social media, step away from your friends for a little bit, and you just go hermit zone, where you just kind of enter your own world. The two line hermit mode, I find though, can also sometimes be a little bit dark, if I'm just honest. I'm not trying to fear monger, I'm just going to speak from my authentic view because I'm trusting you're here for that. I definitely find the two line can have somewhat of a dark quality, where because we have this capacity to really create our own worlds and be so connected to our inner world, when the two line is unconscious, it can illuminate our unconscious inner world. So the two line in the unconscious position, I feel, is very connected to like shadow work, the shadow realms, which is nothing to be afraid of, but there's a really potent opportunity there to work with any kind of tool that helps you. I don't know if you can actually get to know your shadow. Like, I don't think the shadow is meant to be seen because it's a shadow for a reason, right? But to understand the impacts that your shadows have. What are actions that you take when you're acting from more of a compulsive, maybe like triggered or patterned space? What are your unconscious blocks? Doing any kind of unconscious rewiring or guided meditations or processes of getting to know your inner dark and scaries, I like to call them, can be really powerful, because I think it's more present for us as two line unconscious people, 6-2s with that unconscious two line, because like the two line is the inner world. It's the access to the mystical natural world, to this kind of magical connection to life. And for us, that's unconscious. So we're gonna go more into that. I know that can sound kind of abstract and vague, but I do really recommend shadow work for anybody, but especially for 6-2s. And a simple way of doing that, right? Shadow work, not that it's simple, but one way is really getting to know your darker side. We all have dark sides, right? And dark does not mean bad. Dark does not mean evil. It's light and dark is a spectrum. Getting to know our more sense of, the parts of us that act out of fear, or maybe parts of us we're less proud of, or unconscious mechanisms, coping mechanisms. Maybe we have a dark side of like, you notice you get really jealous in relationships, or food addictions, right? Like seeking comfort from like material pleasures, like sensual pleasures, right? When we shine more of a conscious light on the things that can, I wasn't expecting to talk about this, but it's not in my notes, but I'm adding it in. When we take more time to get to know our unconscious kind of like inner little monsters, which are love, they're all love. I think that can really help us transform as 6-2s, because then we get to see what's unconsciously driving us. And I think a great way to counter that is, what are the things that really expand your light? What are things that you're naturally really good at that give you more of a sense of being connected to your giftedness, being connected to the magical child that you are inside, right? We all have an inner child, no matter if we're 28 or if we're 88. Inner child lives on, and I think the two line is such a reflective line of that inner child quality. So let me take a pause here and really reflect on what I want to share next with the 6-2 and the two line component. When the two line is in the unconscious, you may also, right, so there's different ways you might hermit. One is you might unconsciously hermit and get stuck in your own loops and worlds of your fears and shadows and triggers, which can kind of be sometimes hard to come out of because it's very convincing, so we'll give some tips on that. But you also might just really enjoy intermittently having, I call it Hermit Time, when you feel like you pull away from the world. But that can also, it's a fine line, because the Hermit line's gonna feel good when you're in your Hermit Time, but sometimes it's hard to know when to come back out. That's when it's really good to have, good friends in your life, and cultivate good friendships in your life with people who will invite you out of that. Which is why we never want to fully disappear as 6-2s, even if we're in our second phase. I personally don't believe it's the time to fully disappear, unless maybe you're doing like a very intentional pilgrimage or sojourn or like vision quest. I think it's healthy to stay connected, because 6-2s naturally, your energy knows how to disconnect. Your very energy body, the 6 line is like alien, the 2 line is like hermit mystic. You're naturally kind of disconnected, just like by function. So it's actually such good self-care and self-maintenance, no matter what phase you're in, to nurture and honor the friendships in your life, the relationships in your life that really feel like home. And we'll talk about that in the phases, because that can change throughout life. You know, sometimes relationships come and go. That's something we have to learn as humans, but I feel sometimes it gets a little bit more amplified as a 6-2, because we can have a lot of hopes and expectations and dreams for what we want our relationships to feel like. 6 line can tend to see things in the highest and best, but then it's about learning how to hold our own heart and be held in our heart by others when that might not necessarily pan out. So that 2nd line wants to hermit, you know, it wants to go into your own world. It wants to immerse into the unique way that you see life. And this will often be operating at a very unconscious level, which is great. Some people actually have to learn how to cultivate more time for that, because they may neglect that 2 line part of them that needs to just, you know, burrow into its own world. I tend to find that 6-2s, sometimes it's the opposite. It's a little bit easy to burrow into your own world and takes a little bit more encouragement to step out and share your gifts. So you got to have those people in your life. And I'm grateful I have some, even though so much has changed in my life. So many chapters of coming and going, relationships ending. There are some who have stayed the whole time. And there are new people coming in. And that's the journey of life. And the 2 line, another quality I said, right, really understanding your light and how you can access your light, but alongside being aware of our shadow, we can also really start to see what our light is through our 2 line. And before I talk about that, I'm going to share an invitation of what I really love to suggest to 2 line people, especially if it's in the unconscious position. Ask people if you're in any kind of community, or if you're somewhat tight with your family, or if you have a couple good friends in your life or more. Ask them, hey, it's really hard for me to see myself sometimes. And I know it sounds kind of strange. You don't even have to say that. This is how I say it. Like, I know this is a weird request, but I really want to see myself through your eyes. I think it will help me get a little bit more clarity on how I see myself and understanding what my gifts are. Like, what are some of the things that you notice I'm naturally really good at? Or things about me that maybe inspire you, or you see me when I'm doing it or speaking about it, I'm really like in my element. And you might be really amazed to hear what kind of feedback you get back. This kind of reflective listening, being witnessed. I know it can feel scary to do that, but I feel like as a 6-2, it's really essential to have that kind of component. And it's something that throughout, I laugh because I feel like I've gone through so many transformations. The kind of reflections I may have gotten at, 20, when I was first guided to ask those questions through, different mentors I was working with. And then the reflections I get now are probably quite different, but also there are core themes that stick. But it's okay. It doesn't have to stay the same. It's about, okay, what thread is always there? Maybe you've always had a really strong, sweetness about you, or a kindness. Or maybe you've always had a really strong, passion and ferocity. Or maybe you've always had a really strong, intellect and wisdom. Or a quality in you that, stands up for what's right, protects your friends. But maybe there's new ones you've developed. People are like, wow, every time you play the piano, I cry. There's just something about when you play music, it touches me so deeply. And you're like, what? I can't even play a song. And they're like, no, something about that is very magical when you do it. So I think getting reflective feedback from people you love and trust, or even people who are just seeing you on a regular basis, can be really helpful and can even inspire you in ways that you didn't even know you were wanting to be inspired, right? Because the 2 line, which is a naturally gifted, a mystical child, it's in the unconscious position for you, so you can't really see it. You don't know it. You get tastes of it. Of course you can know it unconsciously. And I don't know, tell me if you feel the same. Maybe comment below if you can. I don't know if there's a comment section, but you can email me. Do you feel like you've had this awareness that there's something special about you? And that's not to sound egotistical or arrogant, but I do feel like 2 line people carry this, I'm not going to use the word special. Something kind of sparkles around 2 line people, especially when they're living their life true to their heart. and you're honoring your inner world, and you're honoring your inner mystical child, and you're caring for your inner child. There is this kind of sparkly quality about two-line people. And maybe unconsciously, you have felt connected to that part of you, the mystic within you. Maybe you think about really like wondrous, wild things. Or maybe again, you were a dreamer as a child. Or maybe you have a really strong imagination. This is sometimes also something we have to kind of like resurrect from the dead. Because let's be honest, this life can be harsh. And that 6-line can be harsh. And that 3-line experimentation can be harsh. That sometimes I think that natural, imaginative, lucid, etheric quality of the 2-line can almost get like squashed. But it doesn't go away. We just have to rehydrate it. And I do feel like that's a very strong theme of 2-line people, is there is such a propensity to have this like effervescent imagination, a dream-like quality about you, an ethereal inclination, or maybe way of being. And actually, when you lean into that, it can work wonders for you. The 6-line can get really caught up on like perfecting, right? Because you want to be that role model. But the 2-line is like, I just want to imagine. I want to create a new world. So, which we'll talk about in the next video. I'm sure you can maybe even see how these are starting to come together. When those work together, when we make our pursuit of perfection to be mastering our inner world, and how we then transmit and share that with people, it can revolutionize the world. And that's why it's the role model. It's showing people something they didn't even know could exist before, because you're growing it from your own inner world. So something more I want to say about this 2-line quality in terms of how it can really come across in your career and your relationships with yourself. I think 2-line people love being original, because you're birthing something from your own inner world and experience. So there's part of you that doesn't really want to do what's already being done, which is great, because when you honor that, you can birth through things that haven't existed yet. But if you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself to do that, and there's a sense of not taking any action because it feels too hard, then it might be good to get inspired, to look to other people who maybe are visionaries in the world or from the past. Like some of my favorite people as role models, and this could just be a unique Kelly thing, but I really love reading old philosophers and existentialist writers like Albert Camus, Rainier Maria Rilke, Nietzsche. I just love philosophers because I feel like they tap into this very existential, imaginative, spiritual, mystical quality of life. And that really unconsciously, I notice whenever I read stuff like that, it inspires me to lean more into my inner artist. So there are ways we can work with that 2-line to help it come to life more. And I do feel like if we're not actively doing that, and again, nothing to be afraid of, but that 2-line can sometimes run a little bit wild. And it can make us isolate when we don't need to. It can get us so lost and stuck in our own world and problems. Whereas when we get inspired by that 2-line, and we find the things that light us up, and we ask for reflections, and we allow ourselves to receive reflections from other people of things that they think we're really naturally good at, or magical qualities about us, it can inspire us then to move with that inspiration into some form of like a 6-line activity, whether that's speaking, sharing, writing, having a conversation, whatever it is. Not that the 6-line is fully based on action, but there is a sense of you're visioning and ideally following through on that vision with some level of implementation, right? We don't want to be the armchair philosopher, we want to be getting that lived experience. So in the next video, we're going to look at what can it be like when these two numbers really start working together and seeing a more cumulative look of the 6-2 profile.